Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. I hope that you're having a wonderful day. If you're new here, my name is Neve and it would mean the world to me if you would stick around. Today's video is going to be a updated my favourite books video. I did one of these about a year ago and watched it back recently and the list has changed a little bit, so I thought it would be fun to film an updated one. I will put a disclaimer at the start of this video that not every thing in this video technically actually is a book, but they are all things I've read. I also just like to read plays, so there's a couple of plays on the list, which was also the case in last year's video, but if you've not seen that one, I felt the need to give a little disclaimer. A lot of the books that were in last year's video have stayed strong and remained, but there are new ones and some of them have been taken off the list by now, so I just thought it would be fun to go through them. And I'm gonna not ramble too much intro wise because there are more things sitting in front of me than I thought there would be, so I'm gonna just get started. The first book that I am going to be talking to you guys about is probably the one that you'll be least surprised to see if you've been here for any length of time, and that book is Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Alire Sainz. I'm going to look it up again. This book is my favourite book. It's been my favourite book for about 4 or 5 years now. It's been a while, as you can probably tell. Please don't have a go at me for how far out my tabs are sticking. I know, I'm embarrassed. I'm gonna fix it, I promise. But yeah, this book I will read you the blurb of and then talk a tiny bit about why I love it, and then we'll move on, because if I talk too much about any of these books I will be here forever. Okay. Dante can swim, Ari can't. Dante is articulate and self-assured. Ari has a hard time with words and suffers from self-doubt. Dante gets lost in poetry and art. Ari gets lost in thoughts of his older brother who's in prison. Dante is fair-skinned. Ari's features are much darker. It seems that a boy like Dante, with his open and unique perspective on life, would be the last person to break down the walls that Ari has built around himself. But against all odds, when Ari and Dante meet, they develop a special bond that will teach them the most important truths of their lives and help define the people they want to be. But there are big hurdles in their way, and only by believing in each other and the power of their friendship can Ari and Dante emerge stronger on the other side. This book is just gorgeous. The author has such a poetic, lyrical writing style that really lends itself to how almost introspective this book is. The protagonist, Ari, spends his whole life trapped inside of his own head. He's not very communicative, he doesn't know how to reach out, he feels very isolated. So much of this book is him, you know, going through this friendship, going through this sort of growing up, but through this lens of someone who feels so cripplingly alone, and every feeling and thought that he has is stuck inside of him and doing him harm by being stuck inside of him, by him feeling so isolated. And the writing style and that sort of perspective work so wonderfully together, and ends up culminating in some absolute knockouts of lines that really just right here. I recommend this book pretty much all the time. It's had such a huge impact on my life that I think even if I stopped enjoying rereading it, that it would still be on this list just for what it's done, as I have spent my teenage years growing up with this book. But I love this book, and yeah. There is a sequel now, which I also loved very much, but I've just realised this little fox is really having a bit of a... there we go. Anyway, there is a sequel now and I also love the sequel, but I felt like within this list really the first book was the one that has a very well earned spot. Next up we will do we'll do the other... so this book I've not read in years, but it felt really wrong to think about taking it off the list for a similar reason of Aristotle and Dante, in that this is a book that I was obsessed with at the perfect time in my life for me to have found it. And even though I've probably not read it in about 3 years, I will never be able to forget the impact that it had when I did read it, and for that reason it'll probably remain firm in this list for a very long time to come. And that book is All the Bright Places by Jennifer Niven. I will again read you the blurb. Theodore Finch wants to take his own life. Violet Markey is devastated by her sister's death. They meet on the ledge of the school bell tower and their story begins. It's only together they can be themselves. But as Violet's world grows, Finch's begins to shrink. How far will Violet go to save the boy she has come to love? This book is wonderful. This book is so sad. I read this book for the first time in 2017 and basically read it about 20 times, genuinely, not an exaggeration, from 2017 until the start of 2019, amongst many other books, because I can read a lot. A lot of my sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, key relationships as a teenager were formed because of a shared love of this book, or grew because of a shared love of this book. There are so many people who were in my life and, you know, gave me such joy and happiness, and people who are still in my life who continue to bring me such joy, whose relationships that I really, really value, who I probably would not have had the relationship that I had with them had it not been for bonding over this book. It's also a book that I think I read at an absolutely perfect time. It taught me a lesson that I really had to learn. I saw a lot of myself within Violet in a time where I needed someone else to see myself in. It really just was one of those like perfect, like right book, right time moments, and I'm very grateful for that. I would like to read this book again soon, I think, to see how much the writing of it holds up for me now, because I've read one of the author's newer releases last year and I quite enjoyed it, so like it's not like I imagine I would read it back and be like, oh. But it would be interesting now that I'm no longer quite in that phase of my life, how much the impact would change. So I'll maybe try and give it a reread at some point this year. But yes, very grateful for this book. If you've been here since basically any point in this year, you'll know that I started reading the Skullduggery Pleasant books this year. Started in January. I'm making my way through the series. They were probably my favourite books as a child, but there wasn't that many of them out when I read them, and by the time I sort of fell out of the habit of reading them, like fucking 12 more of them came out, and I'm currently reading them, and I really firmly believe that the first book of that series belongs on this list, but it is in my brother's room and I am afraid to know what's happened to it up there, so I will just put a picture. If you don't know, the Skullduggery Pleasant series follows a young teenage girl called Valkyrie. Well, if you don't know, the first Skullduggery Pleasant book follows a young girl called Stephanie Edgley whose uncle has just died, and in her uncle's death and the will reading and etc, she meets a very mysterious man named Skullduggery Pleasant who introduces her to a world of magic and crime, and they are phenomenal. Derek Landy, the author of these novels, has just hit on something so spectacular. He writes the books so well. The whole series, at least as far up to where I've read, I cannot recommend highly enough, but the first one definitely has a special place in my heart, and therefore it is the one that I felt really needed to have its place on this list. I don't care how old you are, if you like fantasy, fantasy crime, urban fantasy, that type of thing, and you want to heal your inner child a bit, I would absolutely recommend so much that you give these books a go. Rereading them this year has been the most perfect decision. They've brought me endless amounts of joy as I've been reading them. I'm currently on the 7th one, Look at the size of that. This is like 610 pages long or something. It's massive. And I'm having so much fun still, 7 books in, which almost never happens. I usually have an issue with series. I end up losing momentum, but it's not been the case. I'm having so much fun and I cannot recommend them, especially the first one, enough. Okay, the next book on this list, I'm still not 100% sure about it being here, but it's a book that I've not stopped thinking about since I've read it, and I feel like for that reason alone it needs to stay on the list for now. It might not make it to the next update of these I make, but I feel confident enough in its place now, and that book is Lmnop by Mark Dunn, and I'll read you the blurb. As Lmnop writes to her cousin with the latest news on the small, quiet island of Nolop, little does she imagine the crisis ahead. The letter Z has fallen from the statue of Nevin Nolop, revered author of the sentence, "The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog," and the island's rulers interpret this as a sign of divine displeasure and ban its use in any form. In a novel composed of correspondence, the loss of Z is inconvenient, but far worse is to come as more letters fall and more are banned until only Lmnop remain. The story of a battle against tyranny, this extraordinary novel written with an ever-shrinking alphabet, is at once a moving love story, a brilliant political allegory, and an unforgettable celebration of language. There you go. I read this book at the very start of last year and I was just so impressed by it. It's so clever. As it mentions in the blurb, it's written in the form of letters that the characters write to each other in the midst of this change and uncertainty and tyranny and fear, which was such an excellent decision, I think, to have it take that form, because it means that as the story progresses and these characters lose the use of the letters of their alphabet, we get to see that in real time happening, because the author then also has to reduce the use of the alphabet in their writing of the novel, because the characters are writing letters to each other that are being checked before they're being sent. And I was really unsure about how you would be able to, like, the legibility of the novel as it went on, as the letters began to lose, and it's scary because you get used to it, and that's dangerous, and that's exactly what it's trying to tell you. I just think it was such a clever way to discuss how easy it is for extremism to work its way into your life, how easy it is for totalitarianism to set in, and how powerless people can feel when it occurs, the sort of gradual slip into total dictatorship. It was just clever. It was cleverly done. I was so impressed by it when I read it. I talked about it to everyone who would listen for about a month, and I still regularly think about it. And it's one of those books that when I was working as a bookseller at the end of last year, that every time I seen it on the shelf, or every time I shelved it, I was kind of like, because it's just a book that I have like such a distinct memory of being really impressed by, and that really is all you can hope for in the legacy that a book has in your mind. And for that reason, I think that it does deserve to be here, even if it's not a book that I've necessarily like rushed to reread. The experience that I had reading it the first time, and the fact that I really like books that kind of discuss this topic, books like Animal Farm and 1984, but I don't always like the books, if that makes sense. I do like the exploration of this topic, and I like when it's done in interesting ways, and this book certainly is, and for that reason I'm very fond of it. Okay, so the next 2 things that we're going to discuss are not books, they are plays. Both of these were in last year's video. Nobody will be surprised by their existence here if you've listened to me talk for any longer than about 10 minutes, but anyway, let's just have a quick chat about them anyway. So the first play that we are going to talk about is The Pillowman by Martin McDonagh. In last year's video, I didn't have my copy of this play because my very lovely drama teachers, as I was leaving school, arranged for me to be able to send him a letter the playwright, and my copy, and I was waiting for it to come back, and it did come back, and it's been very, very kindly signed. And for that reason, as well as, you know, what I'm about to discuss about the play itself, this play will probably forever be one of my absolute favourites. Just the memories I have of this play, this experience, getting to write to the author, having the author write back, having a personalised copy arranged by two people who were so instrumental in my education and my teenage life, having it be such a huge part of my education as a drama student in high school, a subject which I would have been absolutely lost without at high school, have all come together to just add to the fact that I think this play is one of the best things that's ever happened to me. However, I will read you the blurb and then tell you about some of the more objective reasons as to why I think that this play is phenomenal. A writer in a totalitarian state is interrogated about the gruesome content of his short stories and their similarity to a number of child murders that are happening in his town. That's basically it. That's all you're getting for a summary, and if I gave you anything else, it would ruin it. But basically, this play is a really uncomfortable, violent, black comedy about a writer who is being interrogated by the police in a police state about his work, because kids are dying in the same way as the characters of his stories, and obviously they think he's done it. Martin McDonagh writes characters, he creates characters in a way that just is insane. Like, some of his other plays that I've read since, I've noticed the same about, but this one I think is his, like, magnum opus. He's a very talented man. Loads of people think he's a very talented man. All of his plays have done spectacularly on the West End, on Broadway, touring, the Tony Awards, the Olivier Awards. They're, well, you know, praised plays, but I genuinely believe for this work and this work alone that he is a genius. This play is uncomfortable. It uses a lot of language and violence and swearing that is awful and horrible and uncondonable to communicate such sensitive, well thought points, and usually I don't usually if things are really violent, or there's a lot of like slurs or whatever used, and I'm like, pointless. It is 9 times out of 10 I think this is pointless, this could have been done another way. But there's just something really, the very confronting nature of this play just makes you think so hard about everything that's going on, and you just realise how cleverly these characters have been built, how complex they are, what each of them stands for within the world that they're in, but also in the world at large. And in a play of such inexplicable violence and hatred, there's so much understated tenderness and selflessness and love that just comes completely out of left field. I just you know, like, one day I'm planning and working very hard with a friend of mine to have a full analysis video of this play, video essay style, like my falsetto series, because I could talk for hours and hours about this play and I wouldn't have said enough. It's so clever. And yeah, and I feel validated in thinking so because Mr. McDonagh thinks that this is his best work, and I have to agree with him. So, just saying. But it's definitely not for the faint of heart, which I sometimes am, but yeah, I wouldn't read this if you are squeamish about violence, if you don't like bad language, if, you know, etc, etc. But if you don't care about that and you like sort of, again, plays about, you know, dictatorships and political extremism and really interesting discussions about allegory and morality, then definitely this is a play that I think would be worth checking out. I'm going to stop talking about it now though, because again, I'll just never stop, and we will leave it there. The next play that I would like to mention is a play that you're going to be equally unsurprised about mention, and that is The Boys in the Band by Mark Crowley. This play and the most recent film adaptation of it are probably two of my favourite things that I have discovered in the past 2 years. If you've not seen the Netflix film adaptation of this play with the cast of the Tony Award winning 2018 revival on Broadway, what are you doing? You have to go and watch it. But if you're not a movie person but you are a theatre person, you can read the play instead. I would recommend buying this version here, which has the original play, but it's also got the revised version that they used for the 50th the 50-year revival, which is much shorter and edited and a little bit more coherent and cohesive. This play follows 8 gay men having a birthday party for one of them in pre-Stonewall New York, where being gay was still illegal, and one man who is not gay, maybe, who sort of is an unexpected, unwelcome guest, and the night descends into chaos. This play is an exploration of what being continually forced to be ashamed of yourself does to you as a person. It's what happens when the only people that you can be yourself around are people who are equally driven to shame. It's about what happens when there are only 9 people in the world who you can uninhibited be yourself around, and what that brings out in you and what that means you end up doing to the people that you love. Michael, the protagonist, he is terrified and he is ashamed because the world tells him that he should. There's almost no one in the world that he knows who isn't either like him and equally as ashamed of being who they are, or not like him but who also believe that he is something to be ashamed of, and that results in these people that he invites to this birthday party. They're the only people he trusts, and they're the only people he can be himself around, and that means that they get the best of him, but they also get the worst of him, and the worst of him is terrible, and it's just awful the way he treats these people, but it makes so much sense. It's such an interesting study of shame and repression, but also about growth and change, and each of the sort of 8-9 characters in this play represent a slightly different facet of queerness, especially queerness in 1960s New York. This play is very interesting because it was written, published and started its first run in 1968, which was literally right before Stonewall. So it has a really interesting place in history, in that when this play came out, it was a complete landmark. It done a lot of things that had never been done before. It had queer characters, a mostly queer cast, who were written as people in a way that had never been done before, but because of when it came out and because of the events that then happened so soon afterwards, it became almost immediately out of touch and dated, and almost as soon as its release became a piece of history. And that's had a really interesting impact in the way that the play reads and the way audiences interact with it. The whole thing is fascinating and I love it so much. On the subject of theatre, but not a play, we have Too Much Is Not Enough by Andrew Rannells. This is his memoir of from when he moved to New York to pursue a professional career as an actor, to when he landed his first Broadway role in Hairspray in 2006, 5. It's around then. But we also frequently sort of take trips back into his childhood, his teenage years. I was like very fixated on Andrew Reynolds as an actor, the things that he'd been in, his work, his life story. He's a fascinating, very talented man. And this memoir does not prove that opinion any different. It's written very well. He knows what his voice is, I think, very well. He knows the space that he holds in pop culture, how people perceive him, how he wants to be perceived, what he has to say, and I think he says it very effectively in this. It reads like he's written it. You can hear his voice when you read it. I have read this, and also I have listened to it in its audiobook form, which he narrates himself. The audiobook is also fantastic. If you are a fan of audiobooks, I would highly recommend you listen to it. Maybe listen to it whilst you read. Him narrating it himself is just excellent. It really adds a lot to the experience. It was just a really interesting look in on what it's like to try and pursue a Broadway career, what it was like to be a young gay person in the 90s in New York, having come from a smaller place. It's a very interesting coming of age telling. He's a very fascinating man with some very interesting things to say, some of which are very serious. It explores topics of like abuse and sexual abuse and things like that, which were, I think, handled very well. I would be hesitant to criticise the way he handled his own trauma, but you know what I mean. But it also touches on much lighter topics that are very funny, which I think work especially because a lot of the roles that Andrew Reynolds has played, a lot of the characters he's known for, as well as his like interview persona, is very comedic. And I think if he'd written a memoir that had none of that comedic element, it wouldn't have felt like you were reading his, but it does, and that it was good. So yeah, if you are a theatre fan, if you're a celebrity memoir fan, if you're an Andrew Reynolds fan and you haven't read his book yet, I highly recommend that you do so. There you go. I think that's officially us discussed all the books in this video that were also in the last one. The next two books, and I think probably the last two that I will be discussing, are This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal El-Motar and Max Gladstone. This is a queer sci-fi romance novel. I'll read you the blurb. Ooh, wrong bit. Among the ashes of a dying world, an agent of the commandment finds a letter. It reads, "Burn before reading." Red and Blue, two rival agents hell-bent on securing the best possible future for their warring factions, strike up an unlikely correspondence. But what started as a taunt, a battlefield boast, grows into something more, something epic and romantic, something that could change the past and the future. The discovery of their bond will mean their deaths. There's still a war going on, and someone has to win that war. That's how wars work, right? I read This Is How You Lose a Time War. It was the last book I read in 2021. I finished the year out with it and it literally blew my mind. It's just such a clever romance novel. It utilises its sci-fi time travel aspects very well, but not in a way that is overly intellectual or threatening. But also what's so interesting about it is the two main characters, Red and Blue, that you're following throughout this novel, neither of them are human. And they're both, like, you know, doing some dodgy things in the effort to win a war, and yet they are some of the most human, relatable characters I've ever read, and the love that they grow between them, the romance, the passion, the sort of tension that we get to see build as the story goes on was like an absolute knockout. I've never read anything like it. I was so surprised by the intensity of it and the humanity of it and the tenderness of it for two non-human, very, very career goal driven people. It came so out of left field, my love for this book, but also just, I can't even explain what exactly it is about this book that blew me away so much, other than just the book. Like, you just have to read it. I recommended that my girlfriend read this book after I finished it, and she's of the same opinion, that it's unlike anything she's ever read before. It was recommended to me by a co-worker whose opinion I now trust with my life, even if we don't work together anymore. Their word is now like gospel in my head because of this recommendation. I just cannot stress or recommend this book enough. It totally changed my mind about so many like book opinions and fears that I had about genre and form, and it was just brilliant. Basically, I just cannot recommend or love this book enough. So yeah. And the last book that I would like to talk about in this video is Hamlet by Maggie O'Farrell. I'm going to read the blurb again. On a summer's day in 1596, a young girl in Stratford-upon-Avon takes to her bed with a sudden fever. Her twin brother Hamlet searches everywhere for help. Why is nobody at home? Their mother Agnes is over a mile away, in a garden where she grows medicinal herbs. Their father is working in London. Neither parent knows that Hamlet will not survive the week. Hamlet is a novel inspired by the son of a famous playwright, a boy whose life has been all but forgotten, but whose name was given to one of the most celebrated plays ever written. This book is hands down, I think, one of the best books I've ever read in my life. I read it in January and was just absolutely blown away by the way it's written. This book is a book that you read with your entire body, whether you want to read it with your entire body or not. It's written in such microscopic detail that every one of your senses is engaged. You feel it all. Not necessarily like the way the characters feel it. It's not even so much like a your pain is my pain kind of thing. You're just so drawn in and engaged that like every part of your body is engaged in the reading experience, and that was as fascinating as it was horrifying, because this book is sad and it deals with really horrible, uncomfortable topics. It's about the plague and death and sickness and depression and loss and grief, and none of that is comfortable to experience with your entire body, but it's so impressive and captivating the way Maggie O'Farrell manages to make you be there. It was just phenomenal. Like, I really cannot. Also, this book, if you couldn't tell from the blurb, is about the death of William Shakespeare's child and the impact that that has on the family, particularly on the mother of the children, who is sort of commonly known as Anne Hathaway, but is referred to by Agnes in this, which is apparently was her real name. And you know, we learn a lot about Shakespeare's experience throughout this, but he's the least important character in this, and that was so clever. He's the only character in the book who's never mentioned by name, I'm pretty sure, like the only main character, which is so effective in taking the focus off him even when it's written from his perspective. He's like referred to as like the Glover's son or the playwright or whatever, like the father. So clever. And like, it's interesting because so little really is known about and understood about what Shakespeare was like as a man, that Maggie O'Farrell could have totally, you know, created this personality for Shakespeare and people would have ate it up, right? Like, people would have liked that in a novel, but what she did in not doing that was so much more interesting and so much more effective in a way that I don't even really know how to describe. It's just a literal masterpiece of a novel. It requires you to be so engaged and your brain to be so turned on because of the writing style and the level of detail, and the fact that you can't really disengage from it once you start. Like, you're there. And usually those are books that, no matter how much I enjoy them, I don't think I'm going to reread, because it's like, but I know for a fact I will read this book again, because I'm still so blown away by it. I need to, and I'm craving to experience how this book made me feel again, even when not all of the time what it made me feel were good things. But it was good that they made me feel. I just have nothing but nice things to say about this book. My brain is still blown, as you can tell. If you haven't read this book, if you're humming and hawing about reading this book, take this as your unanimous, no hesitation sign that you absolutely have to do it. Like, oh my god. I knew I was going to leave this book to the end, because it was like the best note to leave this video on, is this absolute masterpiece of writing, Hamlet by Maggie O'Farrell. And that is all for today's video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you have been here long enough that you've seen the first one of these videos and you're seeing the update, thank you very much. If you haven't, do not worry about it. I am so grateful to have you here all the same. If this is the first video of mine that you've seen and you enjoyed it, please consider sticking around. I would love that. And if you did enjoy this video, feel free to give it a like. I hope that you have a lovely rest of your day, and I will see you soon. Bye bye.